I'm going to do something. I spoke at Brandywine on Thursday night, and it was uniquely different because I got to be able to be down in the crowd and talk with people as we spoke. And I want this to be a little interactive, so I'm going to ask a few questions, and I really, for once, really do welcome your comments. Not that I don't appreciate something. Sometimes you guys go so deep, so fast that I'm like, what? And all of a sudden my mind has wandered down the, anyway. We're in Acts chapter 10 today as we, aftermath. What was the effect of the cross? You can read it. What are the things that we do as believers in Christ that really make God smile? What are the things that we do that really make God smile?
Is that the question?
That's pretty awesome. That was the one I was hoping that someone would say, but I thought it would be like 5 down the road before we got there. But the survey says, number 1 answer, share who he is with others. What else makes God smile?
Do something for the least of his brothers.
Serving the least of these. Okay, that's a good one.
The Bible says the worships of praises of his people are like burning incense in front of him.
Cool.
So worship.
That's cool. Worship.
Broad sense, I'm thinking, or just whenever we trust him.
We trust him.
My grandsons jump off and trust me to catch them, or we trust him.
We take that leap of faith.
In any area.
That's a good one. Anybody else? It's okay. By the way, there is no wrong answer here.
Wants to obey his commandments
We obey his commandments.
and the commandment of love thy
Sweet.
neighbor as thyself also as well as loving the Lord.
So we have serve others, share with others, take leaps of faith, worship him, obedience. They're all good things. Turn with me to Acts chapter 10. I want to take a look at life of Peter. What is God's response to Peter on most days? Oy vey. Oh my. Now what? I mean, he was one of God's lovable problem children because he didn't get it, he didn't get it, he didn't get it. Oh my, did he get it overboard? You know? Start in verse 1 in Acts chapter 10. Now there was a man at Caesarea named Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian cohort, a devout man, one who had feared God with all his household and gave many alms to the Jewish people and prayed to God continually. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw in a vision an angel of God who had come in and said to him, Cornelius, and fixed his gaze upon him, being much alarmed. And he said, What is it, Lord? And he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. Now dispatch some men to Joppa and send for a man named Simon, who is also called Peter. And he is staying with a tanner named Simon, whose house is by the sea. And the angel who was speaking to him had left, and he summoned 2 of his servants and a devout soldier of those who were his personal attendants. And after he had explained everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. On the next day, as they were on their way approaching the city, Peter went up to the housetop at about the 6th hour to pray. But he became hungry and desiring to eat. But while they were making preparations, he fell into a trance. and saw the sky open up, and an object like a great sheet came down and lowered the four corners to the ground. And there were in it all kinds of four-footed animals and crawling creatures of the earth and the birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything unholy and unclean." And again the voice came to him and said a second time, "What God has cleansed, no longer consider unholy." This happened 3 times, and immediately the object was taken up to the sky. Now, while Peter was greatly perplexed in mind as to the vision which he had seen might be, behold, the men who had been sent by Cornelius, having asked directions for Simon's house, appeared at the gate and called out, and were asked whether Simon, who was also called Peter, was staying there. While Peter reflected upon the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are looking for you. But get up, go downstairs, and accompany them without misgivings, for I have sent them myself." And Peter went down to the men and said, "Behold, I am the one you are looking for. What is the reason that you have come?" And they said, "Cornelius, a centurion, a righteous and God-fearing man, well spoken of the entire nation of the Jews, was divinely directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and hear a message from you." So he invited them in and gave them lodging. I want us to see some things here. This is not the easiest passage to digest, since we're talking about eating weird things. The first stumbling block many people who study this passage do, they get a hold of this word trance. There was something Okay, I read 18 translations this week. I did a little research in the Greek. I am not going to give you the Greek word. I'm going to tell you what the translations have basically said. It wasn't a trance. It was actually the best word to describe it in some of the other translations is the word ecstasy. Peter was lost in praise, worship. Peter, being hungry, went up to the roof, spent time with the Lord, worshiping God, and God spoke to him. Peter was lost in who God was. He was celebrating who God was. He was thinking about who God is and what God has done. I mean, imagine this stuff. This is the guy who walked on water and almost drowned. This is the guy that God was constantly bailing him out of trouble that he was getting into because he was running beyond the safety lines of what God had set up in his life. He was the guy that told God no, and God said, "Oh yeah, but you're going to change your mind on that one." He was the guy that God said, "Listen, go feed my sheep." So Peter, being who he was, had a lot to be thankful for. And he was on this roof and he was praising God. And the first thing I want you to see, and this is really important, who knows what the word platform means? I'm not going anywhere, Crispy. I'm just repositioning myself. The word platform.
Train platform.
Ah, getting you thinking here.
Right,
Any of my techie people here understand what platform means?
You mean like a base code or an operating system?
Base code and operating system. Okay. When you read books on as an author, as a broadcaster, as an artist, you're working from a base platform to develop your image, to develop your position, to develop the message that you're communicating to people. Let me translate it a different way. Every single one of you has a foundation in Christ. It's a personal relationship in Christ. Out of that personal relationship, everything that you will ever do will flow out of. Who you are in Him is who you are to everybody else. He wants to work through you to do good. He wants to come upon you and empower your gifts and your abilities to reach out and to touch lives. That, my friend, is a platform. God is building upon that platform in your life, that life of praise, that life of worship, that life in Christ that you're developing, that He is going to build upon and reach out to the lost world. He does it in your individual life. Collectively, when we come together, what happens? It's amplified. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together, what? He hears our prayers. 2 or 3 are gathered together. God works through that group, and people in the lost world get hungry and thirsty for what we have because they see the love that we have for one another. And upon that platform, God is able to reach the multitudes. I want you to see here how God's working, because God is about, whenever he decides that he's going to move and do something differently, he starts where the foundation is. He's giving Peter a vision about what he's about to do. What is he about to do? He's about to take the gospel to the Gentiles. What are some of the things that keep us from doing what God, these things that we know to make God smile? What are some of the things that can keep us from accomplishing those things? Fear, good one. Laziness, procrastination is another one.
Busyness.
Busyness. That's the big sin of this generation, by the way. We won't get into that. It's a message for another day. I haven't heard the big one. Apathy. That's close, but not quite. Hypocrisy. How about prejudice? The point of this passage is that we need to get over ourselves and that we need to shuck our preferences, our personal preference. Listen, we all have prejudices. We all, whenever we go, God is trying to work, we always bring these preconceived ideas about why is it that when I go onto YouTube and look at what churches are doing, the image I see is one of two things. Either really beautiful people in skinny jeans worshiping God, or fat, really weird, ugly people doing goofy things that are scaring people. And the world looks at us. And I ask myself, what? Chubby, ugly people can't come to Jesus and live a normal, wonderful life? Do I have to be this beautiful person who, takes a shoehorn to get his pants on in the morning? I mean, come on.
Paint those on, actually.
Paint them on. That's even more scarier. We have these preconceived notions. I heard somebody in this church one day said, well, we don't want to reach Parkside. Do we really want someone in Parkside in our church? I'm going, wait a minute, you live in Brookhaven. Isn't it the same school district? Yeah, but it's Parkside. Oh, we can't go into Chester. We don't want those people. You go to Chester, you know what the people there say? Oh, I don't want people from Wallingford. I don't want those people from Wallingford in my church. It's like we all have these presuppositions where it's like we prejudge what God could do before he does it, and we have shortened God's hand of his being of the ones. God was trying to drive. Remember this. Peter got told 3 times in his vision what God was trying to do. That God was trying to show him, I'm about to do something. I am about to move. I am about to do something that is going to exponentially expand the kingdom. Are you ready?
Isn't the house of a tanner ceremonially unclean?
I'm glad you brought that up. I find it interesting that the angel of God is telling the people, look for the tanner's house. Do you know what the tanner's house smelled like in those days? It was like, go where the seagulls are and you smell garbage. Okay? That's where Peter's hanging out. I'm just saying there's a real pun there. Okay? I also want you to see something else here, because this gets lost on a lot of Christians, Cornelius. What does it say about Cornelius? Centurion. Which means he's a captain of a guard, 100 people. He was a division head, probably a colonel of some sort. Italian cohort, which means they were from a very specific part of Italy.
gave money.
God-fearing.
He was God-fearing. He had favor with the Jews. He gave alms to the Jews. Here's somebody that broke all the rules. You know, the Jews had a problem with everybody. You know, as we will, as you keep reading in this passage and you look at further passages down the road, both Peter had issues with Gentiles, because when he got back and he's, you know, the boys came over in Jerusalem and they're eating, and he only went out with the Jews. And Paul called them out on it. You know, say, whoa, hello, aren't you the one that, why are you neglecting the Gentiles? Listen, this is a battle that was going on in the first church. You know, there were guys there were preachers going out saying, hey, if you're not circumcised, you're not a Christian. Ooh, it's a scary thing to tell a 40-year-old man. Put his manhood out there and get it all carved and hacked off. You know, it's like, oh, you know, that's, you think getting him to be baptized is hard, you know? You know, I mean, seriously, the first church had issues. The Jews didn't want, they considered the Samaritans, who were half Jews, dogs. And come to think of it, I would be considered a Samaritan because I'm only part Jew. I'm like, whoa, woof woof, you know? So here we are. By the way, taking it a step further, the Jews not only didn't like Gentiles, they absolutely hated the Romans because of the occupation. I mean, we're talking hate to another level. You know, we're talking a left-wing liberal talking about a right-wing person on Facebook. You've read those posts, right? It's like, they're scary. They're downright frightening. And the fact is, that's what the Jews were thinking about with the Romans. And they were verbalizing it.
Posting it on social media and all.
Yeah, if they had social media back in the day, you know. And a big tablet, a guy with a thing, they just had, no, anyway. I want you to see this, because here's a man who was seeking. Here's a man who was falling in love with God, who was crying out to God for a relationship, and God sent him an angel. Don't you think the angel, just let me tell you something, if an angel would show up at your bedside table and sit down and say, hey, how you doing? You don't think that angel could have said, here's how you accept Christ? No, because God had a plan. God had this mission. God said, I want you to send for so-and-so because I want these two people groups that are warring, that have hatred and mistrust for each other, to throw down their preconceptions of each other and realize that I'm expanding my kingdom and I love everyone. It is hard to let go of how you were raised. Since we have a more mature crowd here this morning, I'm going to touch base a little bit differently than I would have as a younger crowd. My father was Archie Bunker in a nice kind of sort of way. Kind of an elfin Santa Claus kind of way. But my dad was, I'm amazed I am not so scary prejudiced, because my dad had a name for everybody. Your dad was probably the same way.
Wow.
The wop, the kites, the Polacks, you know. Oh, you're hanging out with a Polak today, okay. Oh, you're hanging out with a wop today, be careful, they're greasy. I mean, I'm sorry, but that is the kind of household I was raised in. The only good Jap is a dead Jap, World War II. You know, I can remember the men in my neighborhood around the fire pit. They're roasting hot dogs, and they're making s'mores, and they're telling war stories, and they're talking about how there's no good Jap and a dead Jap. They'll kill you. And they're sharing their stories. And I had this one guy, Mr. Jones, who's from World War I. And he had his doughboy hat. He would sit there, you know, and his son, Sonny was at Pearl Harbor, was blown off the battleship California, and he walked with this huge metal brace that he would just drag his left leg everywhere he went. He was disabled for his entire life, you know. And he was bitter and mean and angry, and it's just, that was the generation I grew up in. You know, they had this such staunch ethics and work ethic, but the same thing, they had this open, verbal hatred for whomever they didn't understand or they didn't like. So when I read this passage, I can identify with what Peter and the disciples are going through, understanding that God is calling them to go reach somebody different than them. I don't know how you were raised. I don't know what impacted and shaped your life. I know when I found out my DNA and realized that for 300 years my family hid that they were Hispanic and Jewish, that we were told that we were German because that was the passport they used to get to America. But there was always this hushed tone about who we were, you know? We as Christians are ashamed of the gospel because, I'm saying this, in this area, this part of Delaware County, there's a lot of people that are ashamed of the gospel because we don't fit in, because we're different. We have a lot of people that are prejudiced towards other people because they don't look like, smell like, think like. Listen, we have for too long in America have operated our churches under the model of the Roman Church, which is simply this. You have a meeting, you declare the word, you demand a verdict, a response. And then if maybe sort of they kind of like you and you kind of like them, we invite them in. The first churches, modus operandi, how they operated, was they did community with the world. They did church from house to house to house. They had meals, they broke bread, they invited their friends in. They were building relationships with people. And along the way, they would share Christ. And people would come to Christ. But people back then, all the way through, St. Patrick was the same way. All the way through Christian history, the church operated where people connected to the community many times before they connected to who Jesus was. Cornelius is a prime example of this. He was already connecting to the early church. He was already giving money to it. You know, he was already favorably looking at it saying, oh, I wish I could have what they have. But there was this barrier where from the Jewish standpoint was, this guy's the enemy. Now let's bring that home here. Have you looked at the demographics of our community? How many people groups are there within our community that we don't understand? Fastest growing community in Brookhaven are people from Liberia who are Muslim. Do you know that? What do you do with that? Put that in your pipe and smoke it, you know? Muslim community is growing exponentially in the city of Chester. Why? There are no dads, and they're teaching it's important to have a male influence in the home. Gee, church, hello? We have Oriental people moving in droves. The Chinese population's exploding. The Pakistani population's exploding. When we did our ESL program, I was personally blown away the fact that we had people from 11 countries. And they were all, what? All pairs. All wanting to learn the language a little bit better. There were people coming, working in the community. You know, that's just one facet. Now let's get into the social economical standpoint. I had people in Wallingford that said, I'm really blessed by what your little church is doing. And I'm praying for you, brother, but I can't be a part of your church because the people that you're reaching, I don't know if I want to worship with on Sunday. Ooh, that's painful. We have extreme rich and we have extreme poor. We have people with their lives together and we have people that are a train wreck dealing with drugs. We have people that are dealing with lifestyle issues. We have people that are wealthy. We have all this going on. And the fact is that when you look at what Peter was being told to do, was don't look at who they are, don't look at their bank balance, don't look at the house they're living in, look at their heart, and if they are truly seeking after God, you need to give them the gospel. and invite them into community. That's the lesson of Peter and Cornelius. God has no bounds. We have a God without borders. You know, there's engineers without borders, there's doctors without borders. We have a God without borders. That He wants whoever He wants. Listen, we don't know. Our minds are so small when it comes to what God wants. We look and we're in survival mode, most of us. Let's live paycheck to paycheck. Maybe we're getting a little bit ahead. Maybe we accomplished this one goal. Ooh, I finally got my Mustang. I mean, you know, whatever it is. But it's so small compared to what the possibilities are with what God is doing. Close with this. I've had the privilege this summer of doing a pop-up food pantry every Wednesday night. Matt, who's my lead student with the Bonner program, is a believer. We've had some amazing talks. That kid's under so much stress. He's a full ride scholar, and he's an engineering major. And you haven't lived if you're sitting there giving away free food to college students, and you have 5 students sitting around in a little hub behind you with their calculators doing engineering problems and talking publicly about, well, this theory and this, that, and they're trying to keep up with the level of stuff that they're being thrown at, you know. So I got that kind of stuff going on. But the majority of the young people that we're seeing and we're interacting with are Christian. None of them, they don't even know what church is. And the few that do aren't really well connected. They're sort of home away from home. And you're having God conversations, and you're talking about faith life, and it's mind-boggling, because in the midst of all this, you have people saying, how can I help? Had a retiree show up to the pantry on Friday, said, I've got one of my kids living at home, and I got 3 kids living in the house right now that we didn't have a year ago. My wife is laid off. I retired last year. Money's really, really tight. I just heard about this place. Thank you. How can I give back? You have these opportunities. And if we as believers aren't open to the possibilities of, is God bringing us another Cornelius? If you and I aren't prepared for that, those opportunities go by and those people go to hell. Because we didn't interact. Cub Scouts are now Scouts. Changing horses here, but it's the same principle. We have a Cub Scout program that we support. By the way, the Cub Scouts are no longer the Cub Scouts. They are now Scouts, which means little girls can be a part of it. Talk to my Catholic friends, they're like, well, what they're doing is they're taking their scouting program and they're paralleling their CDC classes, their Christian development classes, catechism, to parallel for the kids. The kids go to Scouts one night, and for a season they can come and learn from the Bible. I'm sitting back saying, wow, what an awesome way to grow a kids program, learning something from Catholics. But here's the thing. If we don't interact with Tony, who's the leader, and he's second time around. He was leader before his kid aged out to Boy Scouts, and now he's another one coming up as part of the program. If we as a church don't intentionally look for ways to interact with these Corneliuses, we miss opportunities that God gives us to impact those without Christ. So my challenge as I leave you this week, I want you to think long and hard about your prejudgments, your presumptions, your prejudices. I want you to ask God, God, show me where I could be more open. God, show me and prepare my heart and enlarge my heart that I can love somebody who before I might not have thought I could love. If we prepare our hearts for that kind of a potential interaction, we will have so much fruit that will stagger us. Because when you open yourself up to God's possibilities and what He's wanting to do on your little platform, when He's falling down upon you and He's singing over you as we saw today, and he's worshiping with you, and you're communing with him. And you know what all that leads to is God saying, oh, by the way, look over there. I'm going to close with this. Hung out this Thursday with my buddy Steve Reuter. Steve Reuter looks like a skinny Santa Claus. He's got this glorious white beard. He's got the little curly Q mustache. He's got the wavy hair. He looks like Santa Claus. And we're talking. I said, we've been friends for a couple of years, but I don't know what you do. He goes, I'm a professional Santa. I go, what does that mean? I have an agent. Didn't know Santa's happened. He told me about his philosophy of ministry as a Santa. By the way, he's Santa for Hershey Park. Okay? So he's a significant Santa, thousands of kids. And he said to this, he said, listen, as I'm sitting on the little throne, I'm eyeballing these kids, and as these kids are coming up, I'm praying for these kids. When these kids climb up on my lap, as I'm asking them what they would like for Christmas, I'm putting my hand on the small of their back, and in my mind, I'm praying over that kid. God, lead them to Christ. Because I get that privilege about 20,000 times a year to pray over kids. And what flashed to my mind was the story, Facing the Giants, where the elder teacher was walking down the hallway with his Bible before school, and he's praying, and he's touching every locker as he's going through the school so that every single kid is prayed over. And my buddy Steve's saying, that's what I do. He goes, listen, I'll get parents that'll come up and say, listen, I just lost my husband, just went through a divorce. Their grandfather just passed away, and they're really, really hurting. Could you say something to my child? Steve goes, I always look I start with the positive, where, look, you got a mommy who really, really loves you, who's never not going to love you, who's always going to be there for you. Santa loves you, and Santa will always love you. And I want you to hear this from Santa, because there is a God who loves you, who will always love you. And Santa says so. I'm like, wow, is that powerful? That's something that will stick with a child for the rest of their lives. If that doesn't make them thirsty down the road, if that doesn't make them have questions down the road, and listen, here's the thing, we can pray like that, we can act like that, we can be like that, we can pray over everybody, we can have the greatest prayer meetings in the world. But if we aren't prepared in our hearts, when God says, go talk to them, because of our prejudices, because of our preconceptions, because of our fears, that person loses everything. And we miss the lesson. So I want you to do a self-check. Seek God and see where you need to change, that God can use you even greater than He already has. Father, I pray for my friends this morning and for those that are watching on video. Move upon them, Father. Change our hearts. Allow us, Father, to fall that much more in love with you. Allow us, Father, to understand your greatness and understand and commune with you, that we have such a relationship with you that when you speak to our hearts and suggest what we need to do, that we are open to the suggestions, that we see what you're seeing, that we see what you're doing, that we can choose to overcome our fears and overcome our prejudices, that, Lord, that we can reach out and love somebody and share Christ with them that before we might not have done. Have your way with us, Father, now. Your Son's name.